Malcolm Edwards was a really famous angler from the River Rheidol in mid Wales, in the Aberystwyth area. He caught more double figure fish in that river than anybody else, and dare I say, probably more double figure fish than any other angler in Wales, if not the UK, from a seal win or a sea trap perspective. He really knew the river like the back of his hand. He definitely relied on rivercraft, just knowing the river, knowing where the fish should be when. Just knew the river like the back of his hand and didn't overcomplicate things, which I think there's a lot to be said for that nowadays. It's very easy to overcomplicate things, but to such an extent that he literally just fished with two patterns. One was essentially a squirrel, blue and silver, which he fished up until around July. And then after July, he would then switch to a orange golden squirrel, which he then fished for the remainder of the season. So yeah, he didn't overcomplicate things. He would tend to fish them on 1.75" Waddington shanks, and he would fish two of them at a time, which sounds, I don't think it would be much fun casting them, to be honest, but he got away with it and landed some truly amazing fish. Got to say a big thanks to David Ricketts from the Aberystwyth area for he fished with Malcolm quite a bit and passed on a lot of this information to me. I actually met Malcolm a few years ago. There was a trout and salmon article, and I was fortunate enough to do the photography for that article. So I did get to meet Malcolm, and really nice guy. And I just liked how he did keep things simple. But I lost a lot of the information over the years, but thanks again to David Ricketts for passing on images of his flies. This is the first one. I'll put an image on the screen now of the original patterns that Malcolm did fish with. So you'll see, just very, very simple flies, but he just knew what he was doing where, and produced the goods. So I've got I'm going to tie it slightly differently, just in the base. So I've got an intruder shank here. I prefer the intruder shanks, or tying it this style rather than attaching the hook actually to the shank itself. I do find that you can have a leverage effect when the hook is actually attached to the shank, so I actually prefer to tie the hook as a flying hook rather than attached to the shank, which you'll now see. So it's gonna 10-0 thread in black, the Viva's thread. It's going to take that back down towards the back end of that shank, and I've already prepared a hook and the wire here. Hook is Partridge Patriot Intruder in size 2, and then I've got some Senio wire. I've got some blue here because this is the blue squirrel blue and silver pattern, but it doesn't really matter which colour the wire. Just going to get that dropping just the other side of the end of that shank. I don't want it to be trailing too far back, in fairness. This is literally just to overcome the leverage effect. It's the only reason I'm doing this rather than tying it in. So when you're happy, take in some securing turns. Try and pop that down into the vise. I'm not going to catch it. There you go. So take the wire up the shank. This is just to secure it all. When you're up to the eye section, take a couple of turns there, and then drop those wire ends in through the eye. Double them down underneath that shank. I would take it all the way back down because we've got a silver mylar body. We want an even body to work with. So if you were to cut the wire, the wire that we pass underneath, if you were to cut them too early, you'd end up with a bump. So I'm just going to cut that with wire cutters, just there, and then tie over. Just watch your thread at this point. the end of that wire can cut them. There you go. Take that back up. So that's nice and secure. That's not going to pull out at all. So the body is going to be flat silver tinsel, ribbed over with oval tinsel. So I've got some medium, you can use wide as well, in the silver tinsel. And then I've got some oval tinsel. This is actually in small. You can use small or medium. It's more of a protecting factor rather than actually adding anything to the fly. It just protects the body from the sea trout's teeth. I'm tying them in together. Again, tie it full length of the body when you're securing it in. That's just going to give you a nice even base to take that tinsel back up over, rather than creating lumps and bumps which can just give you an uneven body, just like so. When you're happy with that, start bringing this tinsel up. Nice touching turns. Keep pressure on the tinsel as you're bringing it up. Keep bringing it up. Nice touching turns. Try not to expose any of the thread underneath. Just for neatness. You know what, the fish won't care one bit, but just from a neatness perspective, you know what, if you can avoid it, avoid it. It's just good tying etiquette. Double that tinsel back, and it's nice and secure. Snip off the excess as close as you can. Next we're going to bring up the oval tinsel, and bring the tinsel up in the opposite direction, because that will just lock that body in. Just space it out equally. Space the ribbing out equally as you bring it up. Again, this is just a securing factor. You can use silver wire as well if you prefer, or if you haven't got oval tinsel, just use some silver wire. Securing locking turns, double it back over, snip off the excess. So it's a two-part wing. The first being squirrel tail dyed blue. So you don't want it bleach and dyed, you want it just natural grey squirrel dyed blue. So first things first, take a decent pinch of the blue squirrel, and Malcolm tied these what I would refer to as willy gun style, which is tied all the way around the shank. So rather than actually tying one bunch on top, one bunch at the bottom, he actually tied this all the way around the shank. So it's going to take out some of the underfur, the shorter fibres from the base, like so. So you're just left with a nice bunch. Remember, it's a two-part wing, so don't go crazy with the amount of material on your first bunch. When you're happy with that, take it up, and the first couple of turns you want it to be loose, and I'm trying to splay this around the shank as I go, because just roll it around, because you want it an even coverage all the way around. Take a couple of turns so it doesn't pull out, but then just work that blue squirrel around. Just make sure that you're getting good coverage all the way around. Starting to look good. Make sure there's no gaps. When you're happy with that, next part's going to be the natural squirrel. So the natural squirrel then cloaks over. So you want something that's slightly longer. You want the natural squirrel to be slightly longer than the blue squirrel. And for that we go towards the top end of the squirrel tail, so you get some slightly longer fibres. So take out a decent pinch. Yeah, these are really accessible materials as well. They're not fussy, complicated materials. You know, as per Malcolm's fishing style and way, you know, that simple fishing style of putting the fly in the right place rather than messing around too much with the fly pattern itself. Yeah, the ingredients are very simple as well. and according to David Ricketts as well, so his go-to line, so he used to fish I think it was a 10-foot sink tip. That was more or less his go-to, you know, with a team of these flies as well. And yeah, the light coloured flies for the start of the season really rings true in what I do as well. So light and bright for, you know, early or fresh run fish, dropping onto more somber patterns then towards the end of the season. So when you've got a decent bunch of that squirrel, so what you do then, you're going to do the same thing as we did with the first bunch. We're going to roll that around the shank. So try and get it to cloak over that first bunch. Just take it up, introduce it. When you're happy with the length, come up and roll it around as you bring it up. I've got some slightly shorter fibres there which we'll just pull out in a second, which is fine. Just going to pull them out and then just roll those longer fibres around. Keep rolling so you've got a nice, again, nice even coverage. Just take your time, like so. So when you're happy with that, take in some locking turns. And that's it. So there's no flash, nothing in the wing, just that silver body and those two sections of different coloured squirrel. So all that's left to do is to tidy up this head. So bring in some fine tip scissors and just go in as close as you can just to snip off the base of that squirrel so we can get a neat head. When you've got the finer tips, the butt ends cleaned off, just bring your thread over, just tidy up that head. Thread splitting, just give it a spin just to tighten that rope. And that's the fly done. So when you're using squirrel, I would really recommend at this point putting some super glue in that head section, just to penetrate through the thread and actually to bind the squirrel to the thread. Squirrel can pull out, especially if your thread isn't well waxed. So just a little tip and precautionary measure there. But that is the end of the fly. So that's the first fly, and that's the one he would have started the season with. So next up after this, I will tie the late season fly. But I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you tie a few up and take them out next time you're on the river. And if you get a fish or two, to say a thanks to Malcolm. He'll be watching over you, I'm sure. Tight lines.